Tonight, we are climbing into a time machine set to the 1950s. We are going to the living room of the average American man. The guy in the short-sleeved, button-down, standing in the driveway with a garden hose, and the expression of someone who has just realized the lawn is never, ever going to be finished. Tonight, we are exploring the impossible, contradictory, deeply exhausting standard that every man in post-war America was quietly expected to meet, and almost none of them actually did, even though none of them admitted it. Have you ever considered what it actually meant to be a man in 1952? Did he enjoy any of it? Or did he just stand very still and hope no one noticed? Was he happy in that house with that car and that lawn? Or was he terrified and pretending not to be? Congratulations. You have just woken up in 1952 America. Before he said a single word or earned a single dollar, the 1950s American man had already been evaluated. Appearance was the first test, and it was non-negotiable. You were expected to be clean-shaven every single morning. With the grim precision of a military inspection, your hair was to be short, combed. It in no way expressive of anything. A suit or pressed trousers were standard for work, and shoes were to be polished to the kind of shine that suggested you had nothing better to do, which of course you did. The point was that a man who looked put together was a man who had his life together. The 1950s grooming standard was not vanity, it was compliance. Looking sharp was proof that you were in control of at least the visible surface of your life. And the visible surface was what mattered. In the 1950s, a man's worth was calculated in the most literal way possible by his paycheck, not his kindness, not his humor, not his ability to comfort a crying child at 2 a.m, his income. He was expected to support an entire household on a single salary, to pay the mortgage, cover the grocery bill, handle the car, insurance, and still have enough left over to look like he was not struggling, because struggling even a little was something you kept to yourself. The man who could not grow his income was a man who had, by the prevailing logic, stopped growing entirely. Imagine if your entire sense of personal value was tied to one number that a company decided for you once a year, and you could not discuss how that made you feel. Not with your wife. Not with your wife. Not with your friends. Not with anyone. You just absorbed it and came home and sat at the dinner table and passed the bread. The breadwinner identity was a cage that many men walked into voluntarily. The post-war American office was a masterpiece of organized misery. Rows of identical desks, identical men in nearly identical suits, fluorescent lights humming overhead with the energy of something that was technically alive, but clearly not thriving. There was a boss, and the boss had a private office with a door which was the entire visible difference between success and failure in 1953. You did not question the boss. You nodded. You produced your work. Office politics were not called office politics. They were called the way things work, and you figured them out alone through a combination of observation and quiet suffering. Nobody was going to ask how you were doing and mean it. Mental health was not a workplace conversation. Burnout had not been named yet. If you were exhausted and demoralized, the prescription was to work harder and smile more, which addressed neither thing and was offered in complete sincerity. In the 1950s, a man's handshake was not just a greeting. It was a character assessment delivered in under 2 seconds. Too limp, and you were weak, untrustworthy, possibly European. Too aggressive, and you were compensating. The correct handshake was firm, brief, dry, and accompanied by direct eye contact and a confident nod. Boys were taught to shake hands correctly by their fathers, who had been taught by their fathers all the way back through an unbroken chain of anxious men trying to appear more solid than they felt. Your hand was a credential. It was presented and evaluated the way a resume might be today, except that the evaluation was instantaneous and the result was never shared with you directly. A man who could not shake hands correctly was a man who could not be trusted with anything more complicated, and the logic of that, if you examined it, made no sense whatsoever. But it was the operating logic of the era, and it ran very deep. Owning a home in the 1950s was not just a financial decision. It was a declaration of character. The suburbs were new, gleaming, and deeply serious. Rows of nearly identical houses on nearly identical lots, each one representing a man who had in some fundamental way arrived. The house was proof that you had done what was required of you. It was also, somewhat exhaustingly, a maintenance project that never ended. Something was always leaking. Something was always peeling. Something was always in need of a repair. You had been putting off since February, telling yourself and your wife that you would get to it this weekend, which both of you eventually stopped believing. The house was also a stage, the front of it. What faced the street, what your neighbors and anyone driving past could see, was maintained to a standard that the back of it often was not. The front door was painted, the shutters were straight, the flower bed was tended, and the driveway was free of oil stains. What many of the children of the 1950s men eventually came to understand, often after the father was gone, when the understanding could no longer be used in conversation, was that the distance had not been indifference. The silence had not been absence of feeling. The man who sat at the head of the table and said very little, and provided everything, and showed up to every school event, and came home every night and paid every bill on time, had been full of something that he had never found a way to say in a culture that had not wanted him to say it. The legacy of the 1950s American man is built into the houses he maintained, the careers he sustained, the families he anchored, and the deep generational shift in masculine culture that his children and grandchildren spent the following decades undertaking, not in rejection of him, but as a continuation of something he had started in the only way available to him, which was to provide a stable enough foundation that the people who came after him had the security to ask questions he never could. He did not ask them. He made it possible for someone else to. That is, in its own quiet way, a form of love. And if he could not tell you that himself, it is because no one ever showed him how. And he gave you everything he had anyway. Sleep well. You have earned it.